You know, since this whole corona thing broke out last spring, things are looking rough in this world, right? Dangerous with sickness and disease, and political climate is changing, and rumors of war and all these things. Things are getting rough. And I think the best thing to do is to make a little boat for our kids, put them in it, and send them down the river. That's
Hi.
what Moses did.
His parents
His
did it.
parents did it.
Hi, I'm Shauna, and this is my husband Pete, and we're Golly You Family Discipleship. We're both ordained ministers with the Church of God, and we invite you into our home every day and say, come study the Bible with us. This week we are actually on the Heroes of Faith chapter, Hebrews chapter 11. Today we're going to be discussing none other than Moses. So verses 23 through 29, I'm going to read 23 and then we'll get started with the discussion, okay? It says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child and they were not afraid of the king's edict.
Okay, so they lived in a time whenever in Egypt the king was saying all the male children of the Hebrews were going to die. He didn't want their population to continue growing, and he wanted them to be weak, so he was going to kill out the males who were naturally soldiers and could rebel against him. So in this time frame, he started slaughtering all the children of Israel that were male. Moses' mom and dad decided this kid we got here special. We're gonna hide him away. We're going to preserve him, and they did so as long as they could. And then they placed him in an ark that they had made for him, a little basket, put him in a river, and floated him down the river. And then Pharaoh's daughter finds him and raises him as her own.
Right, he lived a life full of faith that required himself to deny his desires, right? It starts out, the scriptures do, that by faith his parents. So the faith of Noah, what was rewarded first was the faith of his parents because they saw that he was no ordinary child.
Right, and you look at that and you think about what the parents had to do. That faith was passed on to Moses. And it says later on in his life that he decided that he wasn't going to live in the palace because his people were being suffering. So he knew that he was a Hebrew. He knew that he had come from that family. And he said, I'm not going to live this way. I don't want to live this way. So by faith, he stepped out and said, God, I'm going back into the fold. So
Right. He chose slavery. He chose slavery. He chose God's people, protecting God's people, stepping into the promise and the life that God had for him, which was leading and being a leader to deliver the people of God out of bondage. And he had that burning bush moment. He was able to speak with God. God said, take your shoes off, Moses. You're on holy ground. And the Lord spoke to him through a burning bush, and he received a mandate from God. He said,
right.
look, you came out of Egypt, but now I'm going to ask you to return because my children are hurting, and they're dying, and they're suffering, and you are going to be a deliverer.
And of course, he goes back. He stands before Pharaoh. The 10 plagues are released by Moses' commands. And then they get to leave Egypt, and they go, and they're fleeing Egypt. And then Pharaoh says, no, well, not so fast. He starts to pursue with the armies, chases them to the Red Sea, and then what happens?
Then they panic, but God tells Moses to raise his staff because he is going to part the waters and they're going to walk through it. And they did. And they walked through the Red Sea on dry land. And by faith, God moved and he delivered the people. And not only did he deliver the people, but once the people got onto the other side, the army of Pharaoh was destroyed. I listened yesterday to a report that even in the place where they believe they crossed the Red Sea are preserved by coral and reef is chariots that would have been Egyptian chariots back in the day.
So you think about that. We just gave you a little snippet of Moses' life. He lived a life of faith. Later on, of course, he was the leader of the people of Israel for 40 years as they wandered in the desert. And his life was one of, they said he was the humblest person on the face of the earth.
Willing to give his life.
Right. He loved God and he believed God, and God communed with him. We know from the book of Exodus that God would come down on the mountain and give him commandments and teachings and talk to him. And those type of things don't happen if you don't have a tremendous amount of faith. and he believed God would do what he said he would do, and he lived it out. He didn't just believe it; he lived it out every day.
Absolutely. That's what we encourage you to do. We want you to get up every day intentionally living for Christ, exalting God, encountering God, edifying yourself by reading the Word of God, and engage this world for Jesus Christ. It takes a great amount of faith to do the things that God's called us to do, but He's going to give it all to us, everything that we need. So until next time, God bless you.